Florida has a robust archaeological record, a heritage of thousands of years of human activity. My name's Uzi Baram. I'm professor of anthropology, and this semester I'll be teaching Archaeology of Florida. And for this mini class, I want to tell you a bit of what makes Florida fantastic and how delving into the details embodies the notion of indigenous acknowledgement. Florida is famous for some of its landscapes. Of course, Disney, which is tremendous in terms of what it's done to the 20th and 21st century landscapes of Florida. Cape Kennedy with its Space Center, and even early in the 19th century with Fort Jefferson down in the Dry Tortugas. Mostly when people think about Florida and they think about these places, as Craig Pittman points out, there's a fascination with the wildest and weirdest aspects of it. Well, we're not going to look at contemporary Florida in terms of that. We're going to delve into its past. And as much as people are fascinated by contemporary Florida, I think the ancient parts of Florida, the historic aspects, as maybe even more fascinating. Well, think about some of the phenomenon that we've retrieved from archaeological and historical research, such as the Clusa, this grouping of people who encountered the Spanish and became known as the Fierce People. The Clusa who built their capital on a quay in Charlotte Harbor in the shape of a crab and produced some fantastic artwork. We'll go through time in the 19th century. We'll explore the Koreshan Unity settlement, actually not far from where the Clusa had its capital, and look at an attempt to create a utopian society by organizing the landscape and building particular types of buildings that lasted for multiple years. This Florida that's beneath the surface is as big and as unusual as the contemporary landscape, and archaeology helps us to retrieve it. For most of this semester, we're going to go through this sweep of history. We'll start with some of the earliest evidence of people, estimated to be at least 20,000 years ago, although probably longer, and the material evidence that gives us a sense of what was here. As we go through the course, Florida is one of the places where we can best understand climate change. In the ancient days, the peninsula was much larger, and some of the earliest people had settlements that are now underwater. Terrestrial settlements are now underwater. They encountered megafauna, and we have some of the representations of it, and they had some beautiful artwork. These earliest people, they're referred to as Paleo-Indians, give us a sense of the antiquity and creativity of people in Florida. Florida was much larger during that Paleo-Indian period, and rising sea levels as the Ice Age ended meant the peninsula was getting smaller and smaller. And we have the evidence of how people were dealing with it during what's known as Archaic. And so we'll look at some of the archaeological evidence that looks at shells as a way to really get at the dating of places. And these monuments, Archaic period monuments on the coast, that marked the point where sea levels stopped rising, a process that lasted for 6,000 years until our present, and hopefully learn some lessons from these ancient people how to deal with changing sea levels. As we go through the sequence of time, we're going to find material phenomena that are just fascinating. Crystal River, a major center with mounds and stela and other materials that brought people together in large numbers right on the Gulf of Mexico. We'll look at Key Marco, part of the Clusa lands and some of the artwork and wooden objects from that period. We'll be here in Sarasota and look at a stone object and think about who made it and why is it here and what could it have meant. We'll go up to Lake Jackson in Tallahassee and think about a grave with an image engraved on copper and look at some of the interpretations of it. Throughout the semester, we're going to look at the material culture, the landscapes, lay out what archaeologists know, and then work on our powers of analysis and interpretation to really bring out the meaning of these things, these places, and these times. As we examine that long period of time, we'll recognize that 500 years ago something shifted greatly. We see it materially, we know it historically. Ponce de Leon in 1513 comes to these shores and names the place La Florida. And we see that evidence from those Spanish conquerors. and we'll go through what the evidence is and what it can tell us about conquest and colonialism, resistance and accommodation, cultural continuities and ethnogenesis, the creation of new identities in the aftermath of the shadow zones of colonialism. Spanish colonialism was a process, one that was quite uneven as they took on Florida as a frontier. In the context of the Europeans, Florida was also a borderlands area, one that allowed a richness of possibilities for many people, including the Native Americans, who ended up becoming known as Miccosukee and Seminoles. For people enslaved in plantations, Florida was a haven from slavery. And we'll look at the evidence for people who are referred to as Maroons, who are sometimes known and become known as African Seminoles, as well as Black Seminoles. In 1821, the United States of America gets Florida from Spain, and there's a process by which Florida becomes American, starting with the territorial government, and then for statehood, the Civil War, Reconstruction. We'll look at some of the architecture, landscapes, symbols of that process of becoming American. And then we'll get to the 20th century and what one historian refers to as the state of dreams. And we'll think about the process where people imagine big, including next door to New College, where John Ringling and Mabel Ringling created a mansion and museum. We'll think about the tourists who came in their cars and the trains and the representations of tourism in the state that expanded and expanded all through the 20th century and into the 21st century to the point where we are today. As we go through the archaeological record and through those time periods and go through our analysis interpretations, we debate possibilities, we'll also recognize that what we are studying is only what remains and so much is gone. And so we'll try to piece together that puzzle that's missing so many pieces to understand that full heritage and history for Florida. Because I see that work as ongoing and something that you all can be part of, and I want you to be part of it, we'll look at what goes on with the profession of archaeology in Florida. We'll look at what the state has for its Division of Historical Resources. We'll think about and find the examples of the work of the Florida Public Archaeology Network, and really most importantly, as we acknowledge the enduring presence of the indigenous, we'll look at the Seminole Tribe of Florida and its HERO program, its Heritage and Environmental Resource Office, which is bringing together the natural and cultural resources to make sense of what's happening in Florida in this period of rising sea levels. This is an anthropology course, and so I expect students want to be in the class and to engage the course materials, participate in discussions, because everything's up for discussion and consideration. We want to understand better at the end of the semester than we understand now of the materials and the history. And really, I'm hoping as we do this, you all have the background so that we can think about the materiality of Florida, the material culture, the things found by archaeologists in terms of a holistic perspective that includes climate, environment, ecology, plants, animal, people, landscapes, into a very much a large-scale endeavor. We're going to be doing cross-cultural comparisons, so I expect you have some sense of other peoples, other places, other times to make sense of it. And we're going to really work on transgressing time. That's in the images you see here of an ancient person and John Ringling, both sitting down for meals. We think about how past, present, and future do blend into each other as we study the peoples of the various time periods, their continuities as well as discontinuities. To be successful as a course, we really have to think about this as a seminar where everyone contributes to understanding things as we survey archaeological research in and of Florida, as we make sense of the cultural history from the earliest people to the doorstep of the present day, as we look for and try to make our own representations of the Florida past, and to really think about and articulate why Florida archaeology matters. Ultimately, what we want to do is offer suggestions for innovative representations of the archaeological past to make it meaningful for people today and in the future. To do that, we'll read 3 books, as well as have a whole bunch of book chapters, articles, and web-based resources, whether it's Florida's Peoples During the Last Ice Age, The Calusa and Their Legacy, or We Come From Good, which is based on essays from people involved with the Seminole Tribe of Florida's Tribal Historic Preservation Office will bring these together for discussion, consideration, and debate. The requirements for the course are somewhat straightforward, although hopefully flexible and innovative. I expect students who enroll in the class to come to class each and every time, and participate in class discussions and activities. For that book, We Come for Good, I have a kind of a funky assignment. We'll be picking chapters from that book. You'll be picking chapters and ask you to kind of bring together the main point of the book, of the chapter, in terms of a meme. In the first half of the semester, we'll be looking at the most ancient past. I'm going to ask you to use the format of graphic representations of comics to represent an ancient site. In the second half of the semester, I'll explain what a grant proposal is and ask you to take one of the heritage locations, otherwise known as an archaeological site, and create a grant proposal that you'll want to convey the understandings to others, and I'll explain how you raise money and spend it to do so. If you're interested in this course and wonder, is it for you? I set it up for students interested, folks in archaeology, to get empirical data from the state, from Florida. For anthropology students, if you want to expand your breadth to include this local phenomenon of the peoples of Florida, please do so. And if in general you're committed to diversity, whatever your AOC and interests lie, that you take the local and recognize its variation over time. That this helps us understand what was here and what might come here. I'll stress throughout the semester that Florida archaeology matters, that it's important to respect those who came before us, right? That's the indigenous acknowledgement, to put together the pieces of the past for those who are in the shadows of history, that we have a sense of them, but we don't really have a robust notion from the archive, so we go to the archaeological record, and to contribute to social justice by expanding the sense of place for Florida, seeing this as a heritage endeavor that builds community across generations and other differences. If this interests you, the class meets on Monday and Thursdays at 2 o'clock in College Hall 214. If you want to get on Canvas for the course, please email me at baram@ncf.edu. For the first class, I'll ask you to look at some online materials, who we are, the Seminole Tribe of Florida's self-representation, Edmond Key, which is a location in Tampa Bay, and the Seminole Tribe of Florida created this wonderful booklet that's online, and a short essay from a few years ago explaining land acknowledgement, that we want to really think about who was here and acknowledge that long history. I look forward to seeing some of you, and I look forward to you all getting to know Florida even better through an archaeological lens. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it.